Okay, hello, Miss Johnson. I'm going to be presenting my lung disease now. So I had chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD. What is COPD? The full name that you'll hear when they diagnose you is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. COPD is a chronic inflammatory lung disease that causes obstructed airflow to and from the lungs. So that basically means inhaling and exhaling becomes more difficult because it's obstructed, and I'll explain why later. So COPD breaks down into two things. So it can either be bronchitis or emphysema, so one or the other, but most of the cases, COPD is bronchitis and emphysema, which work together to just destroy the lungs, which it's very bad. So bronchitis by itself is inflammation of the lining of the bronchial tubes. So the bronchial tubes right here, these become tightened and inflamed and full of mucus, which I'll show with pictures later. And then emphysema, which destroys the tiny air sacs at the end of the airways, making them less elastic. So basically, what we know is it destroys the alveoli at the end of the bronchioles. It makes them not able to inflate anymore, and it destroys them. And I'll explain a little bit more in detail later. So the big issue with COPD is exhaling becomes more difficult and air gets trapped inside of the lungs. So when you're breathing out, it gets trapped and it's stuck in there, which makes them want to cough more. And then I'll show where it gets stuck in a minute. So how do doctors diagnose COPD? There's multiple tests, as you can see right here. These are the most common ones I found. So the first one is a complete blood count to see if the white blood cells are elevated. So the doctors do a complete blood count. They see if the white blood cells, if there's more of them, because then this gets rid of the possible infections and it points them directly to COPD. And then an arterial blood gas test measures the blood oxygen level. So with COPD patients, they obviously aren't breathing in as much oxygen. So with this test, they can see that like, okay, there's not enough oxygen in their blood. This person could have one of these diseases. And then an X-ray, which we can see right here. This is a CF X-ray, but all the ones I found looked almost exactly the same because this is a normal lung and you can see you can barely even see the lungs because this is the heart right here and the lungs would be around it. I think I'm gonna sneeze. I'm sorry. Bless me. But then the CF lungs, as you can see, are cloudy and they're basically just dying and decaying. And then pulmonary function tests assess the lung function and severity. So as you can see right here, this is what the doctors do on CF patients. They make them blow into this, and then this sees how strong their lungs are, and the weaker their lungs are, and the less oxygen they can blow into this tube. And they also clog their nose so they can't breathe out their nose. The less oxygen they can blow out this tube, the weaker their lungs, and it points them to COPD. And then bronchodilator reversibility test. This is after the diagnosis, but I just included it in here because it's like a test. Um, it examines if the lung function gets better on like the treatments that they're using. And it's basically just like this one. So then the cases and symptoms. So the symptoms are, we have pictures right here. There's shortness of breath and wheezing. So like they basically can't breathe because they're not getting oxygen because they can't, like their bronchioles are clogged. And then the chest tightness, which is because the bronchioles are clogged, it feels tight. The chronic cough and frequent respiratory infections. So the cough, which is that nasty sounding like mucus cough, and then the frequent respiratory infections. So basically their lungs just keep getting all these infections because nothing can fight it. And then swelling, mostly of the ankles, and then eventual weight loss at the end stages. So like as CF gets worse, they stop eating and absorbing nutrition and they begin to lose weight. And then lack of energy because due to the eating and losing weight. And then this picture over here, which is cyanosis, it basically means their fingertips begin to turn blue because they're not getting enough oxygen. Not because they're cold, but also because they're cold, but because they're not getting enough oxygen. But the main cause of COPD is sadly tobacco smoking. But in the developing world, it actually comes from fumes from burning fuel for cooking and heating in poorly ventilated homes, meaning like mostly towards the poorer side and the not wealthy people who don't have enough to properly ventilate their homes. They breathe in those fumes all day, every day, and their lungs begin to get COPD. But then alpha 1 COPD is genetic and cannot be prevented, which is very sad. So then we have the treatments and preventions. Currently, there's no exact cure for COPD. So doctors can't provide a medicine to basically get rid of it and it'll be gone. Once you have COPD, you have to live for it for the rest of your life. But the treatments doctors have now aim at reducing the symptoms that you get when you have COPD. Bronchodilators, which at first I was like, what even is that? It's actually just an inhaler. It's just like a fancy word for inhaler. It helps relax the muscles of the airway and it improves breathing. So it relaxes the bronchus. It basically opens them up just a little bit so they can get some air. And then antibiotics can cure the infections that I talked about earlier, like the little ones, like the tiny infections that people get. And then glucocorticosteroids, they reduce inflammation of the airway. So they reduce bronchitis. They don't cure it, but they reduce it so they can get some oxygen. And then the main prevention is just don't smoke and you won't get COPD. Not all smokers get COPD, but most of them do. And then some doctors, which is actually interesting, some doctors promote getting vaccines to prevent pneumonia. So basically, once you get pneumonia, you're not guaranteed to get COPD, but if it gets worse and goes untreated, after a long time, you will get COPD. But with the vaccine, you won't get pneumonia and therefore won't get COPD. It's not a way to completely prevent it, but it's just something that doctors say could help. And then we have the COPD respiratory effects. So this is basically what's happening in your lungs. So first we hit the chronic bronchitis, which I talked about earlier. This causes the bronchial tubes to be inflamed and narrowed. So as you can see in these pictures right here, this is the healthy airway of the bronchioles. And this is the COPD one. You can see the yellow mucus, which is nasty, and you can also see it's tightened. So air is barely getting in. And then the lungs begin producing more mucus, the yellow stuff. And this is where that chronic cough comes in. And because like people feel it and they want to clear it out. So they cough and it's just that nasty cough that you can hear. And then emphysema causes the destruction of the fragile walls and elastic fibers of the alveoli. So as you see, this is a healthy alveoli with the walls dividing the sacs. But then COPD comes in and then it just destroys the walls in between. And this is actually where the air gets caught in between right here because it's just open and there's like nothing in there. So the air is getting caught in there. It's not releasing. People's chests are tightening and it's just like all stuck in there. So the loss of elasticity prevents poor stretching of alveoli when inhaling and hinders adequate gas exchange. So basically, since the alveoli can't expand and get all the oxygen that's coming in through the capillaries, there's not proper oxygen's not coming in, oxygen's not leaving, carbon dioxide is not coming in. It's basically just bad gas exchange because the alveoli are just getting completely destroyed. And the walls that I explained, they're destroyed. So the walls, this gets stuck in there. And then the small airway collapse when you exhale impairs airflow of the lungs. Basically, the smaller the airways, they're weak, they're smalling, they're collapsing. So when you exhale, it's just not going out. It's just stuck in there. I'm just going to go to this link real quick because, oops. It just shows what's actually happening, and I thought this was actually really interesting. I wanted to get the whole thing up here, but I couldn't. Okay, here we go. You can actually interact 3D. So you go and you see right here, this is the inflamed airway. So this is where the mucus is lining up in there. It's tightening and it's tough. And then we can go actually even deeper to the bronchioles. And then you can see this is the inflaming, these are even inflamed. So it's not just the beginning, the main bronchus, it's actually even all the way in the bronchioles. This is the alveoli, they're inflamed, and then this just takes us back out. So you can just see all the destruction that's happening in COPD. Yeah, so, And then we can go to the ripple effects of COPD. So, of course, when you get a lung disease, it's not just your lungs because the lungs are such a main organ in the body. And of course, heart failure comes with the lungs since they're also close together. So, basically, the heart needs to get blood to the body. That's its job. But since COPD is hindering how much oxygen you're getting, the heart has to do double. So after a long time, your heart just can't keep pumping double since the lungs aren't working, so it just gets exhausted. And consequently, what comes with heart failure, all the other organs aren't receiving oxygen and they begin to fail as well. So then also, with COPD, you can see on this picture right here, osteoporosis, your bones get weak because your bones can't produce, they're not having red blood cells, so those become weak. Weight loss, muscle weakness, of course, your muscles begin to weaken. They're also like, they're not getting out of bed, they're just sitting there doing nothing, so your muscles begin to weaken, and it's not their fault that they're doing nothing. Weight loss, like I said earlier, loss of appetite and stuff. Acute coronary syndrome, basically your heart is going to fail. Diabetes, metabolic syndrome that comes with it, and then peptic ulceration, so ulcers begin to form. And then one of the main ones, which I'll talk about in a second, is depression. So the like COPD affects your body physically, obviously, and with any disease, it affects your head. So the this is a person's daily life. So they begin to feel hopeless and depression um, because they're sitting inside. They can't really do anything. They can't do what they used to do because it's not like they're born with this. They get it over time. So they can't even breathe. So they're just sad and obviously they feel like they can do nothing anymore. Their physical activity becomes difficult because this is a physical activity right here. Because they can't breathe, they can't even run without probably coughing and it'll be really bad for them. The change in sleep patterns or inability to sleep because they're up all night coughing. So their sleep pattern is eventually ruined. Panic attacks and anxiety. So like if they try to do something physical and it affects them and they begin like coughing and then they think they can't breathe, they'll eventually get a panic attack. And social isolation becomes one of them because they can't do anything like they used to do anymore. So they begin to just stay inside. And also fears of getting lung infections since they're so sensitive. So they begin to just stay inside. And they obviously can't eat as much, as you can see right here. They can't eat as much because they just don't have energy for anything anymore. These are some interesting facts to conclude what I found. COPD is actually the third leading cause of death in the United States. And I just think that has to say, like, that just shows how much the United States takes for granted everything. Because, like, you're getting this disease from smoking. So just stop smoking and you won't get this disease. But instead, it's the third leading death in the United States. And then 60 to 85% of mild and moderate cases of COPD are misdiagnosed because doctors see their symptoms and they're like, oh, it's bronchitis or it's emphysema. So they just leave it at that. But actually, there's a bigger underlying cause, which is COPD. And then the rare form of alpha 1 COPD, the genetic one, only affects 1% of the cases. And then COPD costs the United States around $49 billion a year, which is why I have this graph right here, because $24 million go into the smokers. So this is just COPD for the smokers. This is onset and the diagnosis, which is $16 million. And then the lower severity COPD, which is $27 million. And then these are and this high severity, which is $187 million. And then it breaks down like where all this money is going. So like hospitalizations, 11K. So like that's just something interesting to look at. Like it affects everyone. So like it affects our economy just because people won't quit smoking. Thank you. These are the articles I used, the ones that can lead you to where I got all of my information. And then literally smoking takes our breath away. So thank you.